Have a catch and a slog with me in a virtual rise. From small sample size, these fun facts must lie. It's effectively wild, a strange but good hang. Effectively wild.
Hello and welcome to episode 2342 of Effectively Wild, a FanGraphs baseball podcast brought to you by our Patreon supporters. I'm Meg Rowley of FanGraphs, and I am joined by Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer. Ben, how are you?
I'm okay, and I'm pleased to report that Richard Lovelady is yet again with the Mets. This is just the way that we will start every episode of Effectively Wild now. Just checking in. Is Richard Lovelady a major leaguer? Dickie Lovelady, some may call him. Yes, he is. The Mets, they acquired him, then they designated him for assignment, and now he's back. He signed a major league contract, back on the active roster, at least for now.
Wow. What a whirlwind. How the turntables have turned.
It's been a real roller coaster.
Did they take my advice and change his number to 69?
Don't believe so, but there is still time.
Losers. I mean, I guess. How many times are they going to do this? Probably a couple more.
Would not surprise me. And in other news about pitchers that we have followed being back in the big leagues, Matt Waldron has arrived. Knuckleballer extraordinaire, whom I unsuccessfully attempted to have on this podcast for quite some time, but followed affectionately from afar. He had an injury to start the season, and then he was rehabbing in AAA, and he just made his major league debut of 2025 for the Padres. So that's exciting. He's back.
Did you watch any of that start by any chance?
Yeah, unfortunately for him, he ran into the buzzsaw that is Zack Wheeler, who no one can score on. So Waldron was not great, I must admit. He did walk 6 batters. He did not quite make it through 5. He allowed 4 runs. But even if he had allowed 1 run, that would have been too many.
Too many. It would have been. It would have been too many runs, and I want to talk about the Wheeler of it all in a second. But I also just have to say the leader in the clubhouse for the sweatiest boy, that we've seen in the what I understand that it is the East Coast in the summer. It's a sweaty affair a lot of the time, a sticky mess, a dewy disaster. Your butt's not dry for a while. Until you hit September do you have a reliably dry ass. But it wasn't the bottom that was the problem for him. It was the top.
Yeah. Well, we couldn't see the bottom. That may have been a problem too. But if there was swamp ass happening, then it was hidden from view because the pants are less transparent, perhaps.
Oh, wow, I can't believe that you're reigniting that.
Opened to Pandora's box of banter there.
We'll set that obvious piece of misinformation aside for a moment and just say that it was at least not a sweaty enough situation that it was obvious, as opposed to his jersey top, which was so sweaty that John Kruk remarked upon it within moments of him taking the mound. And look, I'm not saying anything about Matt Waldron as a person. He might be sweaty. I don't know. He might be some people, they're sweaty people. They're more sweaty than I am. And I live in a hot place, so I sweat a lot, but nothing wrong with sweating. Your body's way of trying to manage your temperature. And certainly not the only pitcher who in this era of terrible jerseys has had a sweaty top such that it can look like an entirely different color than the rest of the uniform. Many pitchers changing mid-start, changing into something drier. But this man was sweaty from the very beginning. He was just the sweatiest boy. And I wonder if the Phillies hitters were like, he's not going to throw strikes. He looks nervous. He's so sweaty. Yeah. I wonder about that. Here's another thing I'm wondering about. You don't have to remark on the sweatiness. You've already shown that you do not have integrity on this question because of your pants slander. I cannot believe that we would do this again. Here's a concern that I have about the 2025 season. We used to live in a time when Chris Sale was the pitcher who didn't have a Cy Young, right? Right? Chris Sale didn't have one. And then he won last year. Wonderful campaign for the Braves, faded late. We all know the story. Now we are in an era where the guy who you just assume at some point has won a Cy Young because how good is this guy? How has he not been able to do it? Is Zack Wheeler, right? Mm-hmm. How does Zack Wheeler not have a Cy Young? Madness. Insane. Such a good pitch. I'm very worried, though, because you got some really good guys right up at the top of that leaderboard for starters in the National League. And I think that the like fan momentum, the narrative is for Skeens to win a Cy Young this year, right? Mm-hmm. And he's pitching very, very well as Weaver, as well as Webb. You know, there's got this little cluster of guys. Mackenzie Gore, man, good for you, dude. Wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I had the leaderboard up and I was going through the NL names and I was like, Mackenzie Gore, look at you. Jesus Luzardo, it's been less good lately. Anyway, I don't have a vested interest in this. And I don't know that I really care about does a guy manage to win a Cy for my own purposes. It matters to the players very much. And I think that it can make otherwise robust Hall of Fame cases more complicated when you can't point to that guy as having ever secured a Cy Young, right? Like you just have to account for it. And I think that we do a fine enough job of that. And you don't, just because you haven't won a Cy Young doesn't mean you can't be a Hall of Famer, but like it becomes the thing you have to like navigate around, and that voters have to explain and and Jay has to have a whole paragraph in his write-up about that. So it would just be more straightforward if this guy who has just been one of the best starters in baseball lately could win a Cy Young. And I feel background anxiety for Zack Wheeler because, again, I think the narrative momentum, and I don't know if that will matter. I don't know if it'll matter. And who knows what the second half will bring, right? Second half, which we are officially in, right? We're officially in the second half. Mm-hmm. I sound very manic, but I'm really worried about Zack Wheeler. I'm worried that it's not going to happen for him. And he's so good. And it's just, he's one of those guys where I think you have a really good idea of what kind of start you're getting out of him 2 batters in. And yesterday, he gave a leadoff hit to Luis Ariz, and then obviously no hitter, no perfect game was on offer. He'd already blown that, but then they had this moment where he struck out Manny Machado, and the camera caught Manny Machado walking away going, "Oh, wow." And I was just like, yeah, dude, like, I don't know how anyone's doing anything with that today. How is anyone doing anything with this guy's stuff today? And they largely didn't. So anyway, this is me expressing background anxiety for Zack Wheeler. And his, the time is ticking for him, right? Because didn't he like proactively announce he's going to retire when this contract is over?
Yeah, sort of. We'll see.
Sort of.
He could change his mind, obviously. But yeah, he's
probably
35
change his
years
mind
old.
if he doesn't win a Cy Young.
Maybe. But yes, I think his traditional stats would not quite be Cooperstown quality. And as we know, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a starting pitcher to enter the kingdom of Cooperstown these days. It's just like the voters have not necessarily lowered their standards to account for the differences in pitcher usage. And so you might look at Zack Wheeler's stats and say, 111 wins. I know we don't really pay much attention to pitcher wins these days, but even so, that's a very low number by Hall of Fame starting pitcher standards. But
and I don't even mean to say that I necessarily believe him to be a Hall of Fame worthy pitcher. I'm just saying that like it's nice to have that box checked when the time comes to sort of take stock of one's case, because I think it sways people in a pretty profound way.
Yeah, if he doesn't meet the standard, then it's because he didn't get good until relatively late. Right. He didn't really fully flourish until after he left the Mets. He had some solid seasons with the Mets, but he became a real ace.
Zack Wheeler, right?
Yeah, with the Phillies. And now probably his peak, if you era adjusted, at least his peak would be pretty close to Cooperstown quality, but he didn't really he didn't have his first really, well, he had one season that was pretty good at age 24, and then he got hurt, and then he didn't really have another until he was 28, and then he wasn't with the Phillies till he was 30, and then he was hurt for part of that season. Or no, that was 2020, so that was short season. And then, it was like 2021 was like his first truly extraordinary season where he was Cy Young runner-up. So he has been, by any WAR metric, the best starting pitcher in baseball, the best pitcher in baseball over a period of several seasons. And maybe that is enough for a lot of voters to say, yeah, sure, put him in. But it is harder, certainly, even though there are plenty of starting pitchers in the Hall of Fame who didn't win a Cy Young. There's Phil Niekro, Bert Blyleven, though obviously it took a long campaign to get him, and Nolan Ryan, which always surprises people that he never won one. My man, Mike Messina, who had to wait several years despite being overqualified in my mind. Don Sutton, Jack Morris, who had his own narrative in his corner. Jim Cott took forever, of course. So, yeah, I don't know. It would help, certainly, if he had the hardware. But, yeah, he's amazing. He's been great. And he had about a 0.5 ERA in June with like a 1.5 FIP. So yeah, he's been dominant. And Waldron actually hadn't walked that many batters in AAA. He kind of had the control under control, which was heartening. And he set out to throw many more knuckleballs this season than he had previously. And so I was extra excited to see what he could do. Hopefully, I know that the universal concern is the pant and was and perhaps still is. Maybe they haven't fully rectified the pant situation, and maybe it was more enduring, as we have discussed. I know they said that some changes to the uniforms were going to come next season. I don't know if it was specific to the pants, because they did fix the lack of tailoring, personalization of the dimensions, but the fabric was unchanged. I think they tried to get more consistency in the shade of it.
And they were wearing the brown pinstripes. So the color, the pant problem is really a problem with home whites, not with any of the other colors. I think the other colors are less obviously transparent, and that's been true. That's been true in prior eras when the pants were like a little sheer, but not this sheer. But they were wearing the brown pinstripes yesterday. They weren't wearing the home whites because they were on the road. They were in Philly, where it's swampy. You know, I mean, it's not swampy, but like it's, you know what I'm trying to say. So
it's muggy. It's humid. Yeah, I thought that this would be the season of the knuckleball. One of my bold predictions, as you probably do not recall, was that there would be 3 or more actual real knuckleballers who would throw at least 20 knuckleballs each in the big leagues. And Waldron was the first to do it. And there's still some time, but checking in on the other likely candidates, I thought there was Corey Lewis of the Twins. And that's not going so great. He's in AAA with about an 8 ERA on the season in 12 games and lots of walks, not even all starts. So, yeah, that hasn't been great. And then Kenny Surwa was the Tigers guy, signed out of Indie Ball. And he's been doing okay. I guess he started in high A and pitched well and then got promoted to double A and has been not so great there. But, there are still some knuckleball pitchers in the pipeline, but no one who's knocking on the door, seemingly. So Waldron is our hope. So that's good. Glad he's back. Still making our man Rich Hill wait. His arm is just languishing in AAA. You can't waste those bullets from Rich Hill. Like, there's no such thing as a pitching prospect. You gotta get these guys to the majors. Don't have them just fire those quality innings in AAA when he could be up in the big leagues. He spent the entirety of June in AAA. Meanwhile, the Royals had a middle of the pack rotation. They were not Wheeler-esque as a team. Their starting pitchers were 15th in WAR, according to FanGraphs, and I believe Rich Hill had a significantly lower ERA in AAA than the Royals did in the majors. We will not discuss his FIP But the strikeout rates are strong, and he's had a bit of a homer-prone problem. But, he's still missing bats. He's still taking the ball out there. So hopefully one of these days he's put his time in. I think he has more than earned this promotion. It's he's had 5 starts in AAA in addition to some lower level starts. 4 ERA there, 11 strikeouts per 9.
He can't be too fussed about it though, because he has the opt-out. Is he able to just continue to opt out, or having not opted out, is he just like bound to not now?
I think it was reported that he can just go if he gets an offer from someone else.
Got it. So
freedom.
So he's, and some of this might be the the freedom of not having choices, which sounds like a funny way of phrasing it, but you know what I mean? Like some of it might be he's just like, I'm going to keep pitching and stay, ready. And then if someone calls, great. And if it's the Royals, wonderful. And if it's someone else, fine. But it is, you'd think it would happen at some point. And, who knows? Maybe what ends up happening, Ben, is that as guys move around at the deadline, whether it's the Royals or someone else, maybe they're like, well, now we really need a reliable sage to hold down the 5th spot for us because we traded a guy or what have you. So I'm not worried about it. I think he'll have his moment in the big league sun again.
Yeah, the Nationals have their AARP patches on their sleeves now. That could be a good fit. He could be rotation mates with Mackenzie Gore, the young gun, and the old crafty lefty. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that if I'm Rich Hill, I refuse to go to Washington for that reason. I say, no, these jokes, they are too easy. I will spare the comedy gods the displeasure of having to watch such easy jokes. We've already suffered enough this year with the Roman Anthony situation. Can I say something? As someone who's starting to get a concerning amount of mail from AARP, they really try to get you young. How funny is that? A lot of really worse options for a jersey patch, in my opinion. AARP does some good work. And it's not just for discounts anymore, You know how your grandparents aren't constantly, I'm saying this to all of our listeners, how they're not constantly calling you about being scammed? Part of that is the help of AARP and educating them about scams. That's a good thing. It's good. There are jokes, sure. But didn't they have a weird crypto sponsor behind home plate for like a long time after the crypto exchange had gone under?
Yeah, I guess it's on brand for baseball to have that sponsorship. I guess it doesn't help baseball beat the allegations that it's a sport for old people, which seems like it's increasingly less true, if you can say. Maybe I should say decreasingly true, just because the audience seems to be getting younger, but still, there's something to that. So, maybe there's, I guess it makes sense as a sponsorship, perhaps, if you want to reach your potential target audience. They don't even need to mail you letters. They can just put patches on the sleeve.
Yeah, it's like 39 is really when you start ramping up that recruiting.
It's pretty proactive.
Okay. Yeah, I think they know that much like one's sort of unavoidable mortality, that it might take a little while for you to be persuaded because you're negotiating an uncomfortable transition in yourself to like a person who needs an AARP membership.
True.
Nothing wrong with that. It is a funny
time to come to terms with that.
Right. Yeah. It's a funny contrast though, because I do feel like we have a range of stereotypical ages associated with some of the jersey patches. Like obviously AARP is known as an association for retirees, and then like you have Nintendo putting the Switch on the Mariners patches, and it's like young people. How do you like your Switch, Ben?
Though also old people, because Nintendo's been around for quite a while. But, yeah, I've enjoyed my Switch too, but mostly Mario Kart. We need some more games. We got to get Donkey Kong Bonanza out there soon enough. So in other news about pitchers that we pay attention to, Shohei Ohtani threw the hardest pitch of his MLB career, and it was tracked at 101.7 miles per hour. And as Jeff Passan noted, this pitch came against Vinnie Pasquantino.
Yes.
Ohtani previously hit 102 miles per hour in the World Baseball Classic, also against Vinnie Pasquantino. And the Pasquatch had a viral tweet where he quote tweeted Passan, pointing that out, and just said WTF. It's as if he is being targeted by Ohtani. Does Ohtani hold a grudge of some sort against Vinnie Pasquantino, where he's like, I got to reach back for a little extra against this guy. I got to have my best. Maybe it's a mark of respect for Pasquantino. Like, this is the guy. I got to dig deep.
Yeah.
But I would feel targeted, I think, if I were Vinny.
Yeah, raise your hand if you've been personally bullied by Shohei Ohtani. That is pretty funny because, like, how much other exposure. I mean, surely he's had, in his time with the Angels, I bet he had a start against the Royals at some point, probably, right? Like, but, you know, with Pasquantino out with injury as often, like, had they faced off against each other in non WBC contexts?
Good question.
We could look it up.
I'm trying to determine whether I am peeved at Shohei for throwing that hard, because, you know, I get on pitchers' cases when they threw too hard sometimes.
You feel nervous.
Yeah. And I feel especially nervous when Shohei Ohtani is involved. But I think I'm more inclined to give him a pass just because he's still essentially working as an opener at this point.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe he's just feeling that fresh UCL, but also he knew that it was 2 innings max probably for him.
Right.
Which is not to say that it cannot still be damaging for your arm if you throw one pitch that hard, but it's maybe a little different if it's coming at the end of a complete game or something, as it was with Derek Skubal, or if it's Jacob deGrom in prior years and he's just firing pitches like that with regularity. There were fewer pitches on the day for Ohtani. So in that role, until he's a little more stretched out, maybe I'm more understanding without being biased, hopefully.
Yeah, this isn't what I meant to look at. This isn't what I meant to look at, Stathead. Surely you know. I don't want to compare them. I want...
Oh, yeah, I've had that happen to me.
Stathead makes me feel old. Makes me feel old. You can leave it in. Look, ARP, they're coming for me, Ben.
Yeah, you already feel old. I guess that's what they want. So
that's what they want.
Well, let us know when you successfully determine whether Ohtani has faced Pasquantino in other instances.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay.
In other notable pitcher news, we are recording on Tuesday. Jacob Misiorowski is starting on Wednesday, and we will get another edition of the Miz pitching for the Brewers. And this just brought to my mind how unfair conditions are for hitters these days, which is a thought that probably a lot of people have when they watch him pitch and just see how hard he's throwing and how unhittable he has been thus far. But specifically, I think he pairs his high speeds with extreme extension. So he gets great extension, which is not a shock. He is very tall, obviously. There's not a perfect correlation between height and extension, but there's some correlation.
Yeah.
And, you know, it has to do with how much extension you get. That's sort of tautological, but
how far down the mound, as it were.
How long your stride is, just are you a short armor, that kind of thing.
Right.
Or how flexible are you? And extension, as measured by StatCast, it's how far in front of the pitching rubber a pitcher releases the pitch. And Jacob Misiorowski is at 7.6 feet.
Yes.
That's even taller than he is. He is 6'7", but this is 7.6 feet. And he is tied in that metric with a couple guys, including Tyler Glasnow, which is also not a surprise. The only pitcher with longer extension this season than the Miz is Alexis Diaz, who is a mere 6'2". So again, not a perfect correlation there.
Right.
But yeah, very few guys get better extension than the Miz, which is unfair, really, because very few guys, if any, throw harder than he does. It's Paul Gervais, by the way, of the Rays is up there also. He's 6'10", so that tracks also. But it's unfair because the perceived velocity of Misiorowski is going to be even higher because he's releasing the pitch so close to the plate.
Right.
And it makes me marvel at the fact that anyone hits the ball these days, because even in the StatCast era, even in this decade that we can go back and track this, there has been a significant league-wide extension in extension. So for the first 5 years of the StatCast era, 2015 through 2018, the average league-wide extension on all pitches was 6 feet on the dot. And now it's like 6.5 feet. It was 6.5 feet last year. This year so far, 6.4 feet. So we're talking 5-6 inches. The typical pitcher is releasing the pitch closer to the plate than was the case in 2018 even. That's not that long. And it's not as if the average height has changed by an enormous amount in that span of time. So I would guess that this has to do with the fact that we're tracking extension now, that it's so easily measured. Once you can measure something, you can more easily improve it and you can get extra length. And so famously, 60 feet, 6 inches, that's the distance between the mound and home plate. Well, the pitchers have just subtracted 6 inches from that distance. Obviously, it's less than that because they're releasing well in front of the mound and the rubber. But taking 6 inches away, that's like a significant percentage of the distance that they have just evaporated. It's just, it's gone. They've disappeared. And so there's even less reaction time for hitters now. And obviously over this span, the average speed of fastballs, at least, and, every pitch type has increased. And so we can track that easily. PitchFX StatCast going back to 2008. And in that span of time, the average four-seamer speed has increased by 2.5 miles per hour, yet another new high so far this year, 94.4. 2008, it was 91.9. Even 2015, it was 93.1. So not only have you added this speed, but you have also increased the perceived speed by subtracting from the difference. And this is it's a meaningful amount over a fairly short span of time in the grand scheme of things. And so it's really impressive to me that hitters have kept up at all, given that this is going against them in addition to the defensive improvements and everything else. But it really hammers home for me how preposterous it is that pitchers are still delivering pitches from the same distance that they were in 1893. Because this is just, this is over a decade, less than a decade, that we've seen these measurable, significant changes. And even if the pace of change has accelerated since we can track these things now, that there's been some increase over the preceding more than a century and a quarter or so. Pitchers have gotten taller, obviously, over that span. So in 1893, I looked up the weighted average height by batters faced in 1893 was 5'10.5". That was the average pitcher height weighted by batters faced. And this year, so far, it is 6'2 and 4/5. So, so the average pitcher is a little more than 4 inches taller than he was in 1893. So you can forecast some corresponding increase in extension. Right. In addition to just, I'm sure deliveries have changed. There's so much more effort in the windup. I'm sure that, the difference in extension outstrips the difference in height there by a good measure. And obviously the speed differential is enormous. So it's just a completely different problem. The physics are completely different. The stuff is so much nastier, and the pitches are being released so much closer to the plate that I can't believe that this still works. People marvel at wow, we still have 90 feet between bases, and that's more or less still getting the job done. I know the bases are a little bigger now and everything, but it's still okay. The batters are faster, but the catchers are stronger, and maybe the pitchers are delivering the pitches faster and everything. So it all more or less works out. It is much more improbable to me that we still have anything resembling baseball. I mean, it's so different from 1893 in any number of ways. But the fact that you can still have pitchers throwing to hitters from that same distance with a mound now and all the rest, and it still works as well as it does is incredible, and a testament to the improved skill and athleticism of the hitters too.
Yeah. Yeah. And, like, I don't want to say that perceived velocity doesn't matter, because, like, velocity matters. So, of course, perceived velocity does. It's not enough on its own in much the same way that just, like, actual measured fastball velocity is not enough on its own. But we're also, I mean, not you and I specifically, we're really good at making the commas go in the right spot. But, like, the part of it that is, oh, this guy can throw really hard, but maybe his shape is bad. Well, they're better at fixing that part of it too, right? Like, there are just so many things working in concert together. You have, several generations of people with better nutrition, so they're taller, and all of their strength and conditioning stuff is better. And our ability to minutely analyze, their biomechanics in a way where we can say, okay, yeah, let's, adjust your release, and let's think about what your pitch mix should be based on whether you're a natural pronator or supernator. And also we can make you throw harder, and then we can design the hell out of that pitch and make it better because we're changing your grip, we're changing how you're cocking your wrist or not. Like, it is so remarkable that anyone ever gets a hit. And then, but the flip side of that is, like, you look at Misiorowski, and he's been sensational since he got called up. But, like, even in his starts where he has been so good, we've seen how the command isn't always there for him. He's not always able to put it where he wants to or throw strikes. And so then you're like, okay, well, yeah, people can get hits sometimes. Like, they can do that. The Miz. The answer to our earlier query is that they had matched up one time before, and this was in April of 2023. And Pasquantino struck out swinging, singled to left, and then struck out looking. And that is his prior regular season matchups against Ohtani. So I don't know. There's nothing in the time in between the WBC and his experience yesterday that would suggest that he's done anything particular to offend Ohtani, unless singles really bother the guy. So there's that.
According to Baseball Savant, Misiorowski's average four-seamer speed thus far in the big leagues is 99.6, but his average perceived speed, 101.7. And only the now injured Ben Joyce had a higher perceived velocity this season. Not that many people had a higher regular velocity either, but that's a full 2 ticks more on top of already sitting almost 100. So it's hard. It's hard to be a hitter.
It's really something. I would just say this is affording me an opportunity to promote and make reference to our member mailbag, because Matt Martell actually answered a question about Misiorowski and extension and perceived velocity for last weekend's edition. So if you're a FanGraphs member, every Saturday morning, bright and early, you can wake up to our mailbag answers. You don't have to be a member to ask a question, but it's only available to read to our members. So check it out. Yeah.
Nice perk. Fun. Yeah. And that it makes it more impressive that hitters actually are striking out less this season.
Yeah.
And the strikeout rate has plateaued a bit in recent years, which we've talked about. But this year, it's actually down. Rob Means just wrote about this for Baseball Prospectus. 21.9%, which obviously is still very high historically, but is actually quite low in the context of recent years. This is the lowest league-wide strikeout rate since 2017. And even if you limit to position players, since we've gone to the universal DH in that span, it's the lowest since 2018. Yeah. And that's sort of surprising. I don't know exactly how that has happened, because it's not as if the stuff has gotten worse. And by the way, that extension increase, it's still there even if I limit to a certain pitch type to four-seamers. That's a little less pronounced, the difference, but it's still up there. This is record extension this season so far just for fastballs. tied with last season because, even though fastballs are faster now, they're throwing fewer of them.
Yeah.
And you never know if that could affect extension or something, but still directionally the same trend. So the stuff getting nastier, and yet hitters are putting the ball in play a little more. It's nice to have a plateau just because there was that just year over year increase for more than a decade. It just seems like a runaway train. But they've gotten a handle on it somehow. I don't know how to explain that exactly, whether it's the new advanced pitching machines and training against those pitches, not in games, that has helped, whether it's other incentives, whether it's that double bank shot of let's deaden the ball and maybe we'll make it a little less rewarding for hitters to swing for the fences, and maybe that'll make them go more contact oriented. That was one of the ideas behind the defensive positioning in the infield restriction too, though I was not convinced that it would actually have that effect because if anything, it seemed to help the high strikeout pull oriented guys. It was just like, okay, now you don't even have to worry about putting the ball in play and going the other way. You can just keep doing what you're doing. But something seems to be working here. So it's good, I guess. I don't know how much credit to give to the league as opposed to the hitters, but I'm kind of amazed that the stuff keeps getting nastier, and yet hitters are putting the bat on the ball at least a little more often.
Yeah, I am encouraged by it. One, because it felt like a kind of intractable problem, right? Like it was just, to your point of runaway train, we were never gonna never get back. That we would never be able to arrest the trend, and we would just get to a point where like we had to stop playing baseball because the disadvantage between hitters and pitchers was so profound that like it just would feel unfair every time you went up there. And so I feel relief, although I, like you, don't know that I have felt satisfied in particular by the answers as to why. And so I wonder whether it will be a trend that continues, or if we just see a 1-year dip that is the result of some idiosyncratic combination of things, likely including the deadening of the ball. But it's good, if only to get a break from the discourse about it, because there was so much, and it wasn't. Sometimes I get down on discourse because, well, it can be kind of stupid and annoying at times, and sometimes unnecessary, right? Like hand-wringing for no purposes if we don't have better reasons or real ones to have anxiety. But also, the tone of it can suck. But it was an important question. We needed to dig in on why can't these guys stop striking out? And I still think we have to do some work in that regard to have a satisfying answer.
Yeah. This season specifically, I suspect it might have something to do with the tightening of the strike zone and that reduced buffer when it comes to the umpires being graded, which has perhaps made them just clamp down even more, just a little bit, but a little bit could be enough to at least contribute to this effect.
I apologize if you said this before and I was so busy trying to get Stathead to work and make me feel young again that I missed it. But is there a meaningful change in the distribution of those strikeouts? By which I mean, like, is it that guys are like striking out swinging less or striking out looking less, or is it pretty even between the two types? Because that might point to an answer, or at least part of one, as it pertains to the strike zone and how it's being called, Yeah,
that's a good question. I guess even if it's called differently, that could affect the swing decisions that hitters are having if they're picking up on that. But
fair enough.
But yeah, I don't immediately know the answer to that. But yeah, it's not just a one season effect. This dip that we're seeing this year, maybe that's attributable to that, at least partly. But it's also, they've just arrested the rise just over a few years. So there's something going on here. And I think Rob looked to see, is it like that a new generation of lower strikeout guys has come into the league? Or is it that old guys who were high strikeout have been phased out? Or is it just the same guys who were cutting down? And it didn't seem like there was an obvious answer there. And so,
Yeah.
like there are some lower strikeout guys who've come into the league, but also some guys who were there have struck out less. So, yeah, it's encouraging.
I think it's very good. Maybe there were older strikeout guys, and then they got their AARP card, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, look at all the benefits! I get to save how much when I rent a car? My God, I should just join."
It could also be that it's all Luis Arraez. Speaking of arresting the rise, Arraez is part of this
arresting
himself.
The rise, arise, arrest. I can't make
Doesn't
that work,
quite
but I'm
work.
going to keep trying.
Sounds close, but
Yeah.
we got an email from listener Keith who drew our attention to Luis Arraez's strikeout rate, where my attention has often been drawn, but we haven't talked about it this year, I don't think. And Keith said, I'm sorry if this has been addressed recently, but I don't think anyone is talking about the season Luis Arraez is having. The following statements are true, at least according to FanGraphs.com. And that means you can trust those stats. Luis Arraez is striking out at a 2.1% clip. Tony Gwynn never had a K rate below 2.6%. It's been over 60 years since someone has struck out this little. This feels like an exciting race to watch. I'm imagining a world where this race to not strike out is analogous to Joe D's hitting streak. We all check the papers every day to see if Arraez didn't strike out, but instead no one is talking about it unless they are. And if so, please direct me to that conversation. So I have seen people talking about Arraez, but not not necessarily about how low his strikeout rate is.
Right.
Even for Luis Arraez's previously established standards.
Yeah.
And it really is extraordinary because Keith included some stats about just the lowest strikeout rates of all time. But I like to look at K percentage plus, which you can also find at fangraphs.com.
You can.
And that is your strikeout rate relative to the league.
Right.
And I know that there was a season when I tracked this and I was monitoring, could Luis Arraez have the lowest K percentage plus ever? And he didn't end up doing that. But he is right now like really making a run at that, because in the modern era for a qualified hitter, like this season, Luis Arraez's K percentage plus, it shows up as 10 on FanGraphs, because I just said the league-wide rate is 21.9%. He's at 2.1%. He's like a tenth of the league rate. That's unbelievable.
It is.
If you export to a spreadsheet, then you get this out to many decimal places. And it turns out to actually be 9.5 is his K percentage plus if we need that level of specificity. But the only qualified hitter, AL, NL, modern era, post 19th century, who has had a lower K percentage plus than Luis Arraez currently has is Joe Sewell, who was a notable non-strikeout guy in the 20s, the 30s. And he bested this figure 3 times.
Wow.
So 1932, 1933, 1921, but barely better than Arraez is right now. Like his K percentage plus was 7.5, 9.2, 9.5. So Luis Arraez is the most strikeout averse hitter since Joe Sewell, and he's even close to Joe Sewell. He's better than Nellie Fox now when it comes to not striking out, even relative to the league. Now, this may not be good for his overall productivity, which has also been lower than
the prior discourse about Luis Arraez.
I often find the Luis Arraez conversation tiresome because
it's baffling.
It seems to me to be largely straw man based.
Yep.
Because I don't find that many people think that Luis Arraez is an immensely valuable player.
Yeah.
And yet you have these saber types who are like pushing back against the perception that Luis Arraez is like an amazingly valuable guy. And I don't think that many people have that perception. I think people typically understand what Luis Arraez is.
Yeah.
He's a high average hitter and not much else. Just a high contact guy. That's his one just extreme skill and 80 tool. And he doesn't do a lot else. which is perfectly fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I love Luis Ariz. I find him highly entertaining. I'm glad an outlier like him exists. And also, I can hold the idea in my head that he's not an immensely valuable player. He's, he's been a pretty good player. He's been very playable. He's been worth starting. He's an above average player in past seasons. But yeah, like if this were still the 80s or something, maybe people would really be pumping him up just because he's batted 350 or whatever. And he must be amazing. I don't get the sense that many people are thinking that these days. So what are we warring over? Why does Luis Ariz have to be a culture war? Can we not just enjoy him for what he is? But I do. Anyway, like last year he struck out 4.3% of the time. He has more than halved that this year.
Right.
And he's barely been a league average hitter. And he's, not on track for a batting title currently, though I would not at all be surprised if he ends up winning another one with yet another team. But, he's been a replacement level player, according to FanGraphs WAR. So the entertainment value certainly outstrips the value, but that's okay. I want him to be good enough that he can continue to play, obviously, and he's like worth starting. But I don't get the sense that he's really been that overrated. I mean, we pay more attention to him than we would for an equivalently valuable player who had a more generic skill set, but I think that is appropriate.
I also find the conversation around him somewhat confounding, and I feel bad because some of the people whose responses to it I find the silliest are friends of ours, but it's like, what did Luis do to you, Mike? Like, Petrillo is just like got this bee in his bonnet about it. I do think that like it takes people, and by people I mean like fans, a little while to like readjust to current performance. Like, the updating your priors can take a little bit. And so I'm sure that there are folks out there whose vision of Luis Ariz is him from a couple of years ago when, like, if you look at his WAR production pretty much anywhere, he was a legitimately quite valuable player. He wasn't Aaron Judge, but like he was a good player. I think often miscast in the field, but like a very good hitter and a valuable one. But I think that most people's reaction and sort of affection for Luis Ariz is a stylistic one. And this question really points to why, because as we have talked about many times on the pod, like it is nice when you have sort of biodiversity in the ecosystem. And we live in a time of baseball where there can be a lot of the same kind of guy doing the same kind of thing to varying degrees of success. But, I want there to be Luis Ariz's, in the same way that I want there to be Aaron Judge's and I want there to be Jose Altuve's. Now I'm imagining the front cover of Multiplicity, except it's like baseball players. It's just like, oh boy, there's so many of them. You could make an entire team out of Aaron Judge. To be clear, I think that if one is given the option between making an entire team out of clones of Aaron Judge, an entire team out of clones of Luis Ariz's, you should pick the Judges every time. Like that's a better mix, even if you strike out a good bit more. I still think on balance, that's the value proposition. Now I'm imagining Aaron Judge catching. I didn't have that much coffee. I don't know why I'm so peppy today. I'm really tired. Maybe I'm like a toddler, where you pass over into being hyper because you're so exhausted.
You're overtired.
I'm overtired. I am overtired. Anyway, I think that like most people's affection for him is like, this is an aesthetic that we don't see in the game very often. This is a style of offense that has been phased out for the most part, and for good reason if one understands like the purpose to be value generation on the field. But it's nice to have guys like this because it gives you something else to look at. It gives Luis Ariz a fairly narrow path to being a playable big leaguer. And when he has a season like this, you can see how the wheels can come off. And if you're not hitting for as high an average as he has historically, you might get yourself in a position where, even setting aside the defense, you're like either underwater or just barely at, replacement level. So I I don't think that the 286 batting average version of him is either as fun to watch from an aesthetic difference perspective or as valuable, quite obviously. But the idea of there being a guy who, hits 350, who challenges for 400 for a lot of the year and has an ISO around 100. That's fun. It's fun to have. I don't want the whole league to be made out of that guy, but I want there to be a couple of those guys floating around. Because at some point you're like, must we bop? We must bop always? No. Sometimes we do not feel like we want to bop. We are overtired. We would like to hit a respectable single, a working man's single.
Yeah. Yep. Maybe he's taken it too far. Dan Szymborski had a post on him a little while back about how he has entered the contact rate death spiral.
Yeah.
That maybe he's swinging, making a little bit too much contact even for him. But
even for him.
I'm now kind of invested in this race. So thank you to Keith for bringing this to our attention again, and we will monitor this and see, track the chase to track down Joe Sewell in K percentage plus. Now, one hitter who is not contributing to this decrease in strikeouts is James Wood. He was walked 4 times intentionally the other day by the Angels. And the Angels are an outlier when it comes to intentionally walking people, which I want to get to that in a second.
Yes.
But
yes.
Davey Andrews just wrote about this for FanGraphs. Alexandra Whitley wrote about this for Baseball Prospectus. And there's a small group of guys who have been intentionally walked 4 times in a game, or 5 times in Andre Dawson's case.
Yeah.
It's like a dozen guys. And, it happened to Barry Bonds, of course, multiple times, but this does not happen very often. And all of the conditions are arrayed against it happening in 2025. And as Alexandra noted at BP, Wood has some added degree of difficulty on account of fewer intentional walks in this era, fewer lengthy extra inning games, because some of those 4 free pass games were just extra long ones, the kind that we don't really get in the zombie runner era, no desirable pitcher's spot for opponents to target. That was a big thing, of course, if you were batting 8th. I mean, maybe you weren't going to be intentionally walked 4 times in a game if you were batting 8th usually, but like Gary Templeton, that probably applied to him, because if there was an almost automatic out batting 9th, then there were more intentional walks.
Right.
And none of the intentional walks against Wood were cases where, say, the pitcher fell behind 3-0 and just decided to put him on. They were all just proactive free passes. They were all when he came to the plate. There were no real pitches thrown. And so Alexandra concluded, if you use those conditions, you can pretty quickly narrow this down to the most respect shown to a non-Barry Bonds hitter since Roger Maris, or maybe ever. And I guess it sort of worked, more or less. I think the Angels lost that game, but not because they kept putting James Wood on. There was 1 run scored in these situations, which came on a fielder's choice on an inning-ending double play. So James Wood, or the hitters behind James Wood, did not really make the Angels pay for this decision-making. But this is wild that they decided to do this. Like this, teams aren't doing this to Aaron Judge. And for this to happen to James Wood, who is very good, as we have discussed, but he's not on that level where it would make sense seemingly analytically to do that. And as Davey chronicled at FanGraphs, it's not like he had some stiffs batting behind him either. And Davey ran the numbers on like the differential between the hitter who was walked a lot and who was batting behind them. And it's not that extreme. Like Luis Garcia Jr. and Ahmed Rosario were batting behind Wood in this case. And okay, it's not like great lineup protection, but those guys are decent hitters. So it's really incredible that this happened. And it wasn't even Ron Washington, because Ron Washington is now out for the season, seemingly dealing with a medical issue. This was Ray Montgomery, who is the Angels' interim manager. And so, man, we've had so many just weird Angels managerial decisions with a number of different managers. So you might have thought this would be a wash thing, but no, I guess Ray Montgomery carrying on the tradition.
it does suggest sort of an organizational philosophy right now that it hasn't shifted around. It's so bizarre.
Yeah.
I just find it so strange. I can't account for it. I understand. I'm not one of those people who thinks there's like never a time when it's like strategically prudent to intentionally walk someone. Like I think we know that there are, and I also think that there are a lot of, not maybe a lot, there are cases where it's like the math is pretty even, even if it tips slightly toward just make your guy face him and see what happens. And so I can understand there being times where even though it might not be like the sabermetrically obvious choice, a manager decides like for other reasons that they're going to do it, but like it's a lot. It's really a lot. I also wonder, I don't know how you would quantify this. And I think that as with most of those things, batter skill is really just what matters the most. But like, you wouldn't worry about pissing off everyone else. Like at a certain point, aren't you saying you're a bunch of schmoes? What if they say, no, we are no schmo.
Yeah.
We are not a schmo.
I guess they were in this specific instance when it came to getting revenge or proving their mettle. But this has been a long-term thing. The Angels led the majors in intentional walks in 2023. That was still the Phil Nevin era. And they led the A's that year. And then last year with Wash, they were tied for the major league lead with the A's. But this year, they have just lapped the league. The Angels have issued 30 intentional walks, and the Mariners are second with 18.
Wow.
So this, like, as a percentage difference, that's like 2/3 more intentional walks for the Angels. That's, just 67% more. And I did just quickly check, and that would be the biggest percentage difference between the number 1 intentionally walking team and the number 2 intentionally walking team, at least AL/NL going back to 1955, which was when intentional walks became official. So over that span, the average is just 11% more, that the first place intentional walking team, 11% more intentional walks than the second place team. And they're just 67% more. And I guess with the smaller numbers these days, it's easier maybe to outpace the second place team by a lot on a percentage basis. So
sure,
the number 2 on that list would be 2022, when the A's, who also issue a lot of intentional walks over a long term, they outstripped Seattle by, I guess, 54%. And then 2007, it was Atlanta over Houston, 44%. And 2001, Milwaukee over Atlanta, 39%. And then 2019 and 2023 and 1955. But yeah, if this holds up, this would be the most that any team has ever been out of step with the rest of the league.
And, it's like you name some of the other clubs that are high up there, like I don't know that we have like a comprehensive theory of Dan Wilson as a manager, but like, it's like Wash, Dan Wilson, these are guys of an era that isn't, but like
big age difference between Wash and Dan Wilson, but yes,
age difference, but
they are from an era when intentional walks were more common.
Yes. But boy, what a thing. Very strange.
Yeah.
Wash is okay. I'm worried about Wash.
Yeah. Anyway, in other intentional walk news, I saw that the Tampa Bay Rays as a franchise finally caught up with Barry Bonds in intentional walks. That was something that people tracked, that I saw updates every now and then, that the Rays, despite having many more plate appearances than Barry Bonds did in their history,
funny.
Barry Bonds walked intentionally 688 times, and the Rays just equaled that. They are now at 689, and it was like Barry Bonds did that in 12,600 plate appearances, and the Rays were like 165,000.
That's so funny.
Yeah. Anyway, that fun fact finally fell, but it was a good one. It was a stalwart. I saw that trotted out there many a time, and now I guess we've got to retire it, but a well-earned retirement for that fun fact.
Yeah, what a thing, though. That's like really something.
A few other things we have to touch on here. There were a few just weird, fun fun facts and occurrences. For instance, the fact that Wilyer Abreu of the Red Sox had an inside the park home run and a grand slam.
Yes.
Separate home runs in the same game. Yeah. I mean, you could have an inside the park grand slam, but this was two different dingers. Feels weird even to call an inside the park home run a dinger. That
I would
implies
opt to
over
not
the
call
fence
it that.
to me. Yeah. I mean, it's just so rare to have inside the parkers and triples these days with the way that parks are configured and base runners being conservative and everything. But Sarah Langs had the stat. He is the 6th player on record to do that.
Wow.
And the first since Roger Maris in 1958. So it's been a while. 1958, Roger Maris, Jim Tabor, 1939, Charlie Gehringer, 1930, Everett Scott, 1923, and of course, Jocko Fields in 1890. Yeah, so that's pretty special. And I don't know, maybe Fenway's a good place to do that. What with the weird bounces and walls and, balls can get away when an outfielder misplays one. There's almost in every case a misplay on an inside the park home run.
Almost always.
It's very rare to have just sort of a straight, legitimate,
right.
Somehow you beat that out even though no one screwed up. But still, grand slam inside the parker. That's an exclusive club. So that was a fun, notable occurrence. And then Sarah also had the stat. So there was a game, Orioles-Rangers. This was extra innings, and it was a back-and-forth affair. Trevor Rogers of the Orioles and Jack Leiter of the Rangers both hit. And they are, of course, pitchers. And they both had plate appearances. And Sarah noted that this was the first game with the DH rule in place where each team had a primary position pitcher bat. And not just since the universal DH was instituted, but since the DH was instituted in 1973. And this is excluding Shohei Ohtani games, of course. But yeah, I did not expect to see in the universal DH era a pitcher for each team batting in the same game. And that hadn't even happened in a DH rule game going back to the beginning of the DH. So that's pretty special.
Yeah, how about that? That's quite odd. Jocko's sounds like it should be a really good sandwich shop, right? Like,
I can see
gotta
that.
go to Jocko's, gotta get my Italian sub. You'd probably call it a hoagie if you were at Jocko's. I bet Jocko's would be a hoagie kind of establishment, right?
Maybe like a sporting goods store. I could see that too.
Sure.
Maybe. Yeah.
Jocko's is also a good, you wouldn't call an animal Jocko's, you just call it Jocko because that's the Jocko. That's a cool name for like a cat. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well,
a Jocko. Yeah. It's Jocko. I don't know what's going on with me today, man. I'm in some kind of a something.
Jocko's given name was John Joseph Fields. I think Jocko, vast improvement. He was born in Cork, Ireland.
But he went by Jocko, not Jocko's, right?
Yes,
I invented
Jocko.
Jocko's as the sandwich shop.
Yes.
Just to stay in my own brain for a second.
There were a lot of Jockos back in the day. We need to bring this back like Otto and Dietrich.
I love it.
There was
Jockos.
Jocko Fields, Jocko Thompson, Jocko Conlon. Two Jocko Conlons.
Jocko Conlon times 2.
Yeah, Conlon with an A, Conlon with an O at the end. Jocko Halligan, Jocko Flynn. Maybe this had to do with the Irish representation in the game at the time. I don't know.
Yeah.
But Jockos.
Jocko.
We need to bring back Jockos. It's good for just an athlete. They're
Jocko.
they're jocks. It's not a bad,
Right,
it's not
it does.
Makes sense.
Yeah. It does make sense.
More or less, as much as two pitchers batting in a game in 2025 makes sense.
There you go.
Also, a weird thing that happened. I assume you saw this Diamondbacks fan who reached over the fence, and
I sure did, Ben.
Yeah, Diamondbacks Giants game, and there was a replay review, and then it turned out that there was like a lot of lore about this fan.
Yeah,
who got involved here. So this guy reached over the fence. The Giants' Christian Koss hit this ball, and the guy reached over the fence and prevented the outfielder from catching it. Initially, it was ruled a home run, but then they reviewed it, and it was ruled a double because I guess they said it wasn't going to go over the fence anyway.
Well, and in between, they ruled Koss out.
Yeah.
They conferenced, they ruled Koss out. Bob Melvin lost his gourd, which, like, fair enough. And then they sent it to review, and they determined that the fan had not interfered, but that it also wouldn't have been a home run, so he was placed at second base.
Right. Yeah. And the Diamondbacks ended up winning, and the game was over in short order after that. But then it turned out that this is a serial fan interferer. So this guy, people were digging into the archives.
Yes.
And this guy has done this, I think, at least 5 times.
Yes.
He's done this. He's
4
been involved.
times that I saw.
Yeah, well, he's been involved in an umpire review in 4 consecutive seasons. I think it may have been 5 total times, but people are like digging into the record here, and he's everywhere. He's
everywhere.
Zelig. He's Zach Campbell or something, except I guess a little less obnoxious, maybe. Yeah. I don't know what his motivations are. I don't know if he's like, is he trying to help the team? Is he just trying to collect baseballs or what? He was ejected from this game. But I saw people saying, how has this guy not been banned if he's like doing this repeatedly? And I don't know whether it ultimately makes that much of a difference to the team's fortunes. Like, is he helping? Is he hindering? Does it not matter because we have replay review now anyway? It would be a little bit of a different proposition if he were doing this regularly in a pre-replay era, but obviously he's jumping the gun here. He's a little too aggressive when it comes to reaching his glove over there. And I guess the stands are quite close there at Chase. Like, there's no gap, obviously, between the fence and where the fans are, really, as there is in some places. It's harder to do this in some parks, but he has really made a habit of this.
So here's the thing about this that I don't care for. First of all, he practically fell into the field of play last night.
He fell over the fence this time.
Yeah, like, he almost fell into the field of play. He didn't quite. So if you go back and watch, and I have yesterday's up, and I'm looking at it, I don't know what was said between them, but Alec Thomas comes over and has an interaction with this guy after the initial alleged interference. And it does not, from a distance, strike me as a particularly friendly interaction. And so I do wonder, like, how aware of this guy these dudes are. And it could just, it's a big moment. It looked like interference to me. I guess I understand why they eventually did not call it interference, but, like, if this is interference, is as close as you can get without crossing the line. Because he almost fell into the freaking field, and so he's just, like, so far over into the field. It's wild how far over into the field he is. It's not about you, man. Like, no one's here to see you. They're here to watch the baseball players. I don't want to, like, pathologize this guy. I've never met him. Maybe he's a sweetheart. I don't know. But I did not care for this behavior. I think it sucks. And I think that, like, you should just appreciate that no one in the ballpark wants to remember the behavior of any fans at all, right? Like, you want to go home and not have known about this guy if you are at this game. You certainly want to go home and not know about this guy if you're one of the players. And so it's just, don't behave this way. This is bad. This is a bad way to behave, in my opinion. And he's kind of like he's looking around like he's going to be applauded. And if you look back at some of the prior incidents with this guy, sometimes it's with visiting players, but sometimes he's getting close to interfering on what would be, plays involving the Diamondbacks. So what are you? And he's, like, throwing it back, and it's like, again, it's not about you, man. Like, no one's there to see.
Shirt on.
Yes.
So it's equal opportunity, I guess. And I don't know how old he is, but he's a grown, mature man.
He's a grown person.
Yeah. And he has a glove. And I don't have a problem. There are some people who are like, hey, you're a grown-up, don't bring a glove to a game.
Yeah,
I think it's fine. I mean, fine. It's sort of silly. Like, what are the odds that but it connects you to a childhood tradition.
Sure.
Maybe
I
it's
think
like,
that's
hey,
fine.
it's fine, but
also-
within reason.
Yeah.
Like you have the glove in case the ball comes to you, but
Right.
don't go to it.
Get it.
Yeah.
I'd rather, when this happened, I was talking about it with someone last night, and I was just like, I'd rather get hit in the face than engage in fan interference.
Yeah.
But, and it's so wild to me. I don't know. I'm not like a bashful person. We host a 3-time-a-week podcast. We talk a lot. I've never thought that anyone in a public place needs to engage with me this much. It's just like a completely foreign experience. I don't care for it. Just you're not on the team, man. Like you're not there. You're not that wall. It's not a big distance, but it's a large gap,
Yeah. We talked on Hang Up and Listen this week. We did a mid-season check-in on how things are going with the major league teams playing in minor league parks, the A's and the Rays. Mixed bag, obviously.
Yeah.
I think going better for the Rays in any number of ways than it is for the A's. But a few notable things that came to my attention as I was prepping for that segment. So first of all, I think it speaks well of the fan appetite for Major League Baseball in 2025 that year over year attendance per game through the same point in the season is up this year compared to last year, despite the fact that 2 teams are playing in these very low capacity parks.
Ballparks, yeah.
Yeah, it's barely up. It's up by 108 fans per game. But for it to be up at all, despite that, I think that's good.
I agree.
Granted, the A's were not drawing last year because they actively repelled their fans in Oakland. And, the Rays are not the highest attendance team, but they have still lost a lot of attendance. The Rays are the biggest decrease in per game attendance this year is the Rays, about 6,600 fans per game. The A's attendance is actually up on a per game basis because they had so poisoned the well in Oakland. Even though their attendance in West Sacramento, it's down since the start of the season, even though kids are out of school and everything, and that doesn't bode well. It's not even, it's now the hottest stretch of the year too. So, that's not great. But I did notice as I was looking at this that the biggest increases in year-over-year attendance per game are the Mets, who are up by more than 12,000 fans per game. That's a lot. Yeah. And those fans have not gone home happy a lot lately, but still, they are number 1 and the Tigers are number 2. They're up by about 8,500. And that just goes to show, like, those were the 2 teams that finished last season in really exciting fashion and turned around their seasons and made the playoffs. And then the Mets signed Juan Soto. Yeah. And so the combination, of signing a superstar and then finishing that season strong and making a run like that. And then the Tigers, too, finishing the season the way they did and, not going all out over the winter, but making some additions and, Scooplemania and all the rest.
Scooplemania, man.
Those 2 teams, that's what you want. That's what fans want. That's how you drum up interest and attention. And it's always nice to see that rewarded. Yeah. When, teams play well and owners invest in their product to some extent. And then fans say, oh, hey, that seems like a pretty compelling product. I will support that. I will buy tickets. And so, I don't know if that instantly pays for Juan Soto or not, but it certainly offsets the cost. And you're getting one of the best players in baseball, as he has shown of late. So, you want your attendance to go up. And this may be more and more important perhaps as broadcast revenue stagnates, maybe, and attendance becomes again a bigger part of the revenue pie. Well, that's how you have to do it. Not that all 30 teams can be good at the same time, and there's only one Juan Soto, but this is the carrot that you're aiming for when you spend and when you win.
Yes, I think the fact that there is a so obvious seeming, narrative here, right? You play well at the end, you get folks excited, you pay off that promise in the early going. And you're right, like it's been a rough road for the Mets of late, but they spent much of the earlier part of the season before this skid in first place in their division. They have Soto, they have, all of the other exciting players that who were already on their roster. And yeah, you want there to, these, I don't want to talk about owners like they're dummies, but like make it obvious. Yeah, we spent some money on the team, or in the Mets case, we spent a lot of money on the team, and we're playing good competitive baseball generally, maybe not in this immediate little stretch here, but like we're playing good competitive baseball. We have a lot of talent on the roster and people want to come out and see that talent. And I think that's wonderful. And it's exciting when you see that, in a city like New York, where you have brought in this, huge superstar within the game, you spent all this money, it working out is good because you want the owners that have the kind of capacity that Steve Cohen has, which, to be clear, isn't all of them, to spend big. But it's also encouraging when you see this stuff in a smaller market. Detroit's not the smallest market that has a major league team by any means, but like it's an AL Central team, and presumably that's an easier division to win. But no, they're playing good baseball. As we've said, we don't need to like AL Central adjust the Tigers. This is just a good team. And you want to see those gains in, I think, mid-markets too. So I think it's great. Yeah. It's so exciting. Yeah.
And on the flip side, the two teams that have lost the most per game attendance, aside from the Rays, are the Cardinals, who did nothing all offseason and have maybe been more successful than you'd have expected, but did absolutely nothing to drum up interest or excitement.
Yeah.
And the Orioles, who obviously are off to a very disappointing start, but also had sort of a disappointing offseason. So, this narrative we've constructed, this works on the other end too. Yeah. And just an update also on how those parks seem to be playing, because that was a question coming into the season. So the Rays playing at George M. Steinbrenner Field, been basically neutral. And, I guess it's kind of weird because they had a weird distribution of home games. They front-loaded their home games because famously wet and warm in Florida in the summer. And so they played a lot of home games earlier in the year when it was cooler. But overall, it's been basically neutral, whereas the A's, and yes, caveat, a half season of park factors is not enough. And usually we look at 3 full seasons, but this is all we have. We have a half season. So Sutter Health Park factor is right up there, tied with Coors Field to this point. So that's been that environment. And now it's going to get really hot there. So, I know they're playing a lot of night games to compensate for that. But that has been a high offense park. There was some question because a lot of people said, it's going to be an absolute bandbox. And other people said, but the park factors actually, it was a pretty pitcher-friendly AAA park. And how will that translate to being a big league park? We don't know. But thus far it is translated too. And this is not just because A's pitchers are bad. This is also comparing their performance and everyone's performance in that park to elsewhere. And
correct.
It's been it's been bad for A's pitchers in Sutter Health Park.
Like you said, we don't know for sure like what it'll yield over a full season, but some of the it's actually a pitcher friendly park, and it's like, well, in the context of the PCL, like pitcher friendly, and that doesn't mean that it can't genuinely be pitcher friendly, but I do think that sometimes that part of the caveat got forgotten too, where it's like that entire league plays in freaking bandboxes, and Sutter Health was less bad than the others, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be good. And it's been, in fact, bad, bad. Bad.
Yeah, and the conditions and safety and accommodations and everything, there have been many more complaints about Sutter Health Park than George M. Steinbrenner Field. In Tampa, it seems like the issues have been the only really like safety kind of concern I've heard is that there's just very little foul territory and you can kind of run right into the stands. But aside from that, it seems like the complaint has been because there's no third deck. It's a minor league park, spring training park. The winds swirl and blow in and it can get like Wrigley-esque. And also the lights are not great by big league standards. And so that is probably why it has played fairly neutral despite, you know, having the same dimensions as Yankee Stadium. And I mean, Yankee Stadium has been also fairly neutral this season, at least. But yeah, you might have expected that park to play higher offense too, but there are other factors that make it tougher for offense. But Sutter Health, obviously, even Luis Severino is saying that it's just not a big league stadium and is reportedly maybe on the market. Maybe he would have been anyway, but it seems like the A's aren't thrilled with that. But he is speaking his mind and not walking it back. Now, I don't know what he expected when he signed a 3-year deal to play there in December. Like, you know, because his complaints are about like the atmosphere. It doesn't seem big league. He also has noted like, you know, the walk to the clubhouse. He can't watch the game between innings when he's pitching because he'd have to walk all the way to the outfield. Right. And also it's not air conditioned out in the clubhouse, which seems ridiculous if that's not.
Seems,
but unless they really misled
like a union
him
issue.
about the upgrades that they were going to make, it was never really going to be a big league park, and he did sign up for that. So if it went beyond that, and part of it, he's pitched poorly there compared to on the road. Actually, both the Rays and the A's have worse records and run differentials at home than they do on the road. So there really hasn't been a home field advantage for either of them. But there have been visiting players who have complained about the mound being bad in Sacramento, about the batter's box being bad. Yeah. Maybe that it's even an injury risk potentially. I think Joe Ryan intimated that maybe Pablo Lopez's injury could have been related to pitching there. And Zack Wheeler, the aforementioned Zack Wheeler, said it was like, you know, cement, the mound, the dirt was bad. Carlos Correa said it was the worst batter's box he's ever seen. So that's not good. But if the complaint is more about like the atmosphere and where the clubhouse is, that was known, I guess, when Luis Severino signed. Like, I don't blame him for maybe having signer's remorse or, you know, he gets there and it's like, oh, this does actually suck. But, you know, it was kind of clear that it was going to suck probably.
So I've seen a lot of people like kind of taking the piss out of him for this comment. And, you know, what he should have done was he should have called Joe Ryan and been like, yo, I have something to say about this, but I shouldn't be the one to say it. So can you, he should have laundered his complaints through an opposing pitcher.
Yeah, I appreciate that he didn't though. And he said some of his teammates felt the same way, even if they weren't saying so explicitly. But, you know, to have and going on records and, you know, even if it's a guy who chose to play there, like still to highlight that, you know, with everything that's going on in Vegas or not going on. They had this for-show groundbreaking, which was just sort of a farce with rented moving equipment. And, you know, there's just like more than $1 billion short of the funding there.
Deeply unserious.
Like you can sell your MLS team and try to sell minority shares in the A's, but Fisher's going to have to make good on saying, my family's going to kick in $1 billion here because I just... As of now, at least, there's a big difference between and like the costs are increasing, not just, I mean, tariffs and everything else. It's making everything more expensive. And so the estimates for how much that park is going to cost have gone up. That's a mess. So this is even more relevant because you could say 2028, they'll be out of there, but that park is vaporware as of now.
I saw a lot of people kind of giving Severino a hard time about this. And sure, there's like what were you expecting component to it, certainly. And, you know, Severino got paid and arguably maybe got paid a little above market in part because of his willingness to go there. But I don't know, man, like you think that you can bear hypothetical indignities for a long time and then you're living in it every day and you're like, this sucks. sucks.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that his experience of it is being heightened by the fact that like he is not pitching particularly well. The team isn't doing super great. You know, I think that if the A's were in a position where they were like, you know, challenging for a wild card spot or whatever, that the reaction would be different. The atmosphere there would be different. The vibe within the clubhouse would probably be more positive if, to your point, we knew like, oh my gosh, they're going to act like they really broke ground on the new park and we're only going to be here for so long. Like that impression of it might change things, although Severino probably wouldn't be on that team anyway. But living in it every day.
Yeah.
I mean, like I've heard, I don't think that this has factored into the reports of it quite as much. And, you know, fair enough, because who cares about us really? But, you know, the press box is tiny. Their accommodations for an Ox box are like pretty paltry. So it's not a serious thing. You know, having a big league team play there isn't serious. And some of the issues that they're having, I think, were anticipatable, but others, like, there's really not air conditioning in the clubhouse. Seriously?
Yeah.
Like, that seems like a union issue. Like, isn't that a grievance? What's going on out there? That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. So I just, you know, this was going to be a mess from the jump. And I think that we collectively wanted there to be some charm to it. The idea of a big league team having a season or two in a minor league park as they deal with renovation, or, you know, a situation like the Rays emerges where really no fault of their own, right? Like the fact there was this unresolved ballpark situation, certainly, but the reason that they're playing there isn't because they couldn't come together with the county or the city. It's because of a hurricane. You know, that's not their fault. But every misstep with the A's could have been avoided if you'd had a different owner, if the situation had changed, if there had been better concessions. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what I'm rooting for. I mean, I'm rooting for him to sell the team. The answer to all of this is for this guy to just sell the team and let someone who actually has the resources or the willpower to invest in it the way it deserves to do that. I want better for the players of that club and for the people associated with the team that aren't John Fisher, but I don't really want them to break ground in Vegas either, because it doesn't make sense to put a big league ballpark in that city. It just doesn't, you know? So it's a real pickle. It's a real mess.
Yeah. Even though the Rays situation is also unsettled long term, they will hopefully be back in the Trop if it's repaired in time for next year, whereas the A's are stuck where they are, at least for a few years, seemingly. So it's going to continue to be a problem.
Yeah.
And it will continue to be reflecting poorly on the league that it let this happen. And Rob Manfred has talked about his legacy as he prepares to retire after this current term.
Yeah.
And he said that expansion, which it's been a long time since expansion, the longest time without an expansion since expansion started. He said that they have to get this A's and Rays situation settled, and it is still not. Now, speaking of Rob Manfred, he spoke, and that's rarely a good thing. So we have more to say about some comments that Rob Manfred made that were reported this week by Evan Drellick over at The Athletic. But we probably have too much to say to shoehorn this in at the end of an episode.
Yeah.
So we'll save that for next time. But Rob, we're coming for you.
Yeah.
Okay, a few quick things. I looked up that 2023 game in which Shohei Ohtani pitched to Vinnie Pasquantino, and the hardest pitch Shohei threw in those matchups was 98.7 miles per hour, and then after that, 96.8. So he doesn't seem to have had it out for him on that day. Also, we talked about the league-wide strikeout rate declining slightly. The league-wide 3 true outcomes rate, percentage of plate appearances made up of walks, strikeouts, and home runs, 33.4% so far this season. That would be the lowest since 2016. I don't think there's a big seasonality effect to strikeout rate. It doesn't change that much over the course of the season. Home run rate might rise, but the walk rate hasn't budged that much. Strikeouts are down a bit, and even the home run rate is down from its highs. So more balls in play. Arise's TTO percentage this season is 7.6%, so about 23% of the league average. Also, when we talked about the Diamondbacks fan who keeps interfering, I meant to mention an update on the Ketel Marte situation. Still unclear to me exactly what was said by that fan that brought Marte to tears, or what the intent was, at least. Marte said in an interview, a fan was up on the dugout shouting things about my mother. He was like, last night I sent a message to your mother. He also said, we have to do something about the fans. They're going too far. They always shout things about me, but not about my mother. Everyone knows that my mother died in an accident. They always shout things at me, but I don't pay attention. But when they talk about my mother, it's a different story. Understandable. I wouldn't say that everyone knows that Marte's mother died in an accident, so it still seems possible that this was just a generic comment from the fan to Marte that touched a nerve with Marte, understandably. But I don't know. Maybe we won't know. That's fine. The nice follow-up to this was that when Marte returned to Chase Field, he got a great response from the fans, standing ovation, very supportive, and he got choked up again, but this time for a good reason. You can support Effectively Wild on Patreon by going to patreon.com/effectivelywild and signing up to pledge some monthly or yearly amount to help keep the podcast going, help us stay ad-free, and get yourself access to some perks, as have the following 5 listeners: Ashley Brabon, Alex Clark, Jeff Tripodi, Zachary Williams, and Pat Bradley. Thanks to all of you. Patreon perks include access to the Effectively Wild Discord group for patrons only, monthly bonus episodes, one of which we just released this week. There are now 44 bonus episodes available whenever you sign up. You can also get prioritized email access, personalized messages, playoff live streams, discounts on merch, and ad-free FanGraphs memberships, and so much more. Check out all the offerings at patreon.com/effectivelywild. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can message us through the Patreon site. If not, you can contact us via email. Send your questions, comments, intro and outro themes to podcast@fangraphs.com. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Effectively Wild on iTunes and Spotify and other podcast platforms. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/effectivelywild. You can find the Effectively Wild subreddit at r/effectivelywild. And you can check the show notes at FanGraphs or the episode description in your podcast app for links to the stories and stats we cited today. Thanks to Shane McKeon for his editing and production assistance. We'll be back with another episode a little later this week. Talk to you then.
How can you not be pedantic? A stat blast will keep you distracted. It's a long slog to death, but they're sure to make you smile. This is Effectively Wild. This is Effectively Wild. This is Effectively Wild.